She sprayed it directly into his face, not his hands, his face, and then she smiled. He didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't reach for his phone. He just stood there, in a hotel he owned, at a front desk he'd paid for, on marble he'd chosen, and let it happen. Security was called. Then the police, and still, he waited, because some men fight back with anger. This man fought back with patience, and patience, it turned out, was the most devastating weapon in the room. The last time Darnell Webb walked into this hotel, he was nobody. No title, no team, no car waiting at the curb. Just a man with a confirmed reservation and a carry-on bag, standing at a front desk in Atlanta, asking for a room he'd already paid for. They told him the hotel was full. He stood there and watched them give that same room to the next guest through the door. That was 5 years ago. The hotel had a different name then, different owners, different everything. Darnell had driven away without making a scene. He'd gone to a different hotel, checked in without incident, lain on a bed that was slightly too soft, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. 2 years later, when the Apex hospitality chain came up for acquisition and Grandeur Palace was on the property list, he didn't hesitate. He bought it. He bought all 19 properties, and today, a Tuesday in October, the air outside carrying the first real chill of autumn, he came back. Alone, unannounced. In a gray wool coat he'd bought at a department store for $47, shoes that had seen better years, a rental car he'd specifically asked not to upgrade. He came back to see if anything had changed. This was the part nobody knew about. Not his assistant, not his board, not the general manager of this property, who had been calling his cell phone for the past 6 months with occupancy reports and renovation updates and very good news about the restaurant's quarterly revenue. Nobody knew about the gray coat visits. That was the whole point of them. Darnell called it the gray coat test. He'd been doing it since 1999. Since second property, since the manager in Macon who'd smiled perfectly and performed perfectly, and allowed his front desk staff to tell guests they didn't serve certain types on weekends. He'd learned something from that manager, not about hospitality, about the distance between how it behaves when it knows it's being watched and how it behaves when it thinks it isn't. That distance was the only thing that mattered. You could read every report. You could review every guest satisfaction score. You could sit in a conference room and look at spreadsheets until your eyes gave out. None of it told you what happened at 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday when a tired man in a gray coat walked through the door and needed help. This was how you found out. He sat in the rental car for a moment after he cut the engine. The parking structure was dim and smelled like concrete and exhaust as ordinary smells. The smell of a place that didn't know it was significant. He wasn't nervous. He'd done this enough times that nerves weren't part of it anymore. What he felt was something quieter, a kind of readiness. The particular stillness that came before the thing that was going to happen, whatever it turned out to be. He picked the coat from the passenger seat. He thought about Ruth. Ruth had been the one who told him to start doing these visits. Not in those words. What she'd actually said one evening in the kitchen of their house in Birmingham, while he was complaining about a manager whose performance reviews looked great on paper and whose staff had apparently been telling guests the continental breakfast was for premium members only when it wasn't, was this? You need to see what you're actually building, Darnell, not what people show you when they know you're coming. He'd thought about that sentence for 3 days before he understood it fully. Then he'd gone to the nearest property, unannounced, in a coat that wasn't his best one, and he'd stood at the front desk and asked for a room under a name that wasn't his, and he'd watched. He'd been doing it ever since. Ruth had been gone 4 years now. 4 years, 2 months, 23 days. He wasn't counting, except that sometime part of him was always counting, the way you count things you've lost without meaning to. The way time keeps its own record, whether you ask it to or not. She'd had a heart attack on a Thursday morning. He'd been in Charlotte for a meeting. He'd gotten the call at 9:15 and driven to the airport and sat on a plane for 50 minutes that felt like a different kind of time entirely. slow and unbearable, and completely outside the normal movement of hours. He hadn't done a gray coat visit for 8 months after that. Then one morning he'd gotten up, gotten dressed, picked up a coat that wasn't his best one, and gone to a property in Nashville, because it was what he knew how to do. Because building things was the language he had for grief when other languages ran out. He put the coat on now, checked that his regular jacket was stowed in the back seat, looked at himself briefly in the rearview mirror. A 52-year-old black man in a gray coat that cost $47, shoes that had done 2 years of honest work, a watch that cost more than most people's rent for 3 months. The watch was the one inconsistency, the one thing that didn't fit the costume. Ruth had given it to him for their 25th anniversary, and he hadn't taken it off since the day of her funeral. He kept his left sleeve pulled down. He got out of the car. Grandeur Palace sat at the edge of Midtown Atlanta with the quiet confidence of a building that knew what it was. The driveway curved on approach, deliberately, so you slowed down. So you arrived. Tall hedges, architectural precision, stone's facade that had been designed to look older than it was. 18 months ago, Darnell had approved a 4 $2 million renovation of the lobby and the first 3 floors. New marble, new lighting. The fireplace in the seating area that he'd specifically requested because he'd read somewhere that fireplaces made people feel like they were somewhere worth being. And he'd wanted this hotel to be somewhere worth being. The doorman outside was working a town car that had pulled up just ahead of Darnell. A couple in good coats, the woman carrying something that might have been a hat box, the man already talking on his phone. The doorman called them by name, smiled, moved their bags with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 10,000 times, and still made it look like he was glad to do it. Darnell walked past without being acknowledged. He noted it. He always noted everything. That was the job. The lobby opened the way a good lobby should. Wide, warm-lit, ceiling high enough that your chest expanded slightly on the first breath. The marble floors he'd paid for caught the light from the tall windows along the south wall. To his right, the seating area with the low chairs and the fireplace he'd requested, which was running, putting out the kind of warmth that wasn't strict necessary on an October afternoon, but was exactly right anyway. Straight ahead, the front desk. 3 stations, 2 staffed. A line of 5 people moving steadily. But Darnell took his place at the back. He pulled out his phone, looked at it without seeing it, watched the room. There was a woman at the left station whose name tag he couldn't read yet from this distance. She was working efficiently, processing a check-in for a man in a business suit, moving through the steps without wasted motion. Good signs. He watched her hands, the way she oriented the key card folder so the guest could read it, the slight forward angle of her body that said she was paying attention and not just performing attention. He watched Walt for 2 full before the line moved, and he moved with it. He could read her name tag now. Dane. She finished with the businessman. He took his keys and headed for the elevator. Diane looked up, not at Darnell, through him almost. The kind of look that takes something in without acknowledging it. He'd seen this look before. He knew exactly what it was and what it meant, and he kept his face still and waited. The person ahead of him fished up at the second station. Darnell stepped forward. He walked to Diane's station. He stood at the counter. She was typing something. Finishing something. She let him stand there for a moment that was slightly longer than it needed to be before she looked up. The smile arrived, deployed correctly. Eyes doing something adjacent to warmth without quite being warm. How can I help you? The period instead of the question mark. He heard it. I have a reservation, he said. Webb, Suite 12-1. Her eyes went to the screen. Something happened in her face. Small, controlled. There, and then managed. Last name, Webb. Typing, a pause. First name, Darnell. More typing. The pause that followed stretched about 3 seconds longer than the system required. He'd stayed in enough hotels to know exactly how long a name lookup took. I'm showing a reservation under Webb Consulting LLC, she said, for Suite 1201. That's right. And you're, a fractional pause, representing the company? It's my company, he said. My reservation. Do you have a corporate card? I have both, corporate and personal. He reached for his wallet. Either works for check-in. He set the corporate card on the counter. Black card, the name of his holding company embossed on front, his name beneath it in smaller letters. She picked it up, looked at it, put it in the reader, and then she did the thing he'd been watching for. It was subtle. A particular angle of her chin. A slight shift of her eyes toward the office door to the right of the desk. Not a word. Not a gesture anyone watching casually would have caught. But it was a signal. He'd done 61 of these visits. He knew what a signal looked like. The office door opened 30 seconds later. A younger woman came out, moving with the energy of someone who wanted to appear helpful and actually wanted authority. Her name tag said Carol. She positioned herself just behind, and to the right of Darnell's natural sightline, not in the conversation, observing it. I'm going to need a government-issued photo ID as well, Diane said. Darnell looked at her. You have my card. My name is on the reservation. That's your standard protocol. We have additional requirements for certain reservations. Which reservations? A half-second pause, high-value suites. He pulled out his license, set it on the counter, said nothing. She picked it up, compared it to something on her screen, picked up her phone and typed something, not a call, just a message, and put it down. One more moment, she said. Behind him, the line had grown. He could feel it without turning around. 4 people, maybe 5. The lobby moved around the stillness at his station the way water moves around a rock. He stood still. He was thinking about the message Sandra had sent him 6 weeks ago. Sandra Bloom was his VP of Human Resources, based in Birmingham, 12 years with the company. The kind of person who communicated in facts and trusted him to understand their weight. The message had been short. She'd forwarded the complaint, which had come through the anonymous feedback system he'd implemented when he took over the chain Dane 2 years ago. Specifically so people who worked in these buildings could say what needed saying without fear. The complaint was from someone's housekeeping. Donna Wells. He knew the name from the submission metadata, though the form itself was anonymous. He'd looked up her file. 34 years old, 6 years at Grandeur Palace. Rated exceeds expectations for 4 consecutive years, she'd written. I don't know if anyone reads these, but I need it to be on record somewhere. There is a pattern at the front desk. Guests who look a certain way wait longer, get asked for more documentation, are assigned rooms on lower floors even when they've booked higher. I've seen it for 6 years. I'm writing it down because I think someone should know. He'd read it twice. Then he'd marked his calendar and booked a flight to Atlanta. 6 weeks later, here he was, standing at a front desk in a hotel he owned, waiting for a woman to finish finding reasons not to give him a key. The sanitizer pump was on the counter to Diane's left, one of those clear bottles with a small printed sign, "For your convenience." He registered it the way he registered everything in these lobbies: inventory, ambient detail, background. He didn't register it as a threat. His mind was elsewhere, on the complaint, on the 6 years of pattern Donna Wells had described, when Diane's hand moved toward the bottle and she pumped it, once, twice, outward, not into her own palm, the mist of it catching the air between them. Some of it reached his face, his eyes, the sharp, cold burn of alcohol. He did not react. He stood completely still, and he let the moment be what it was. "Sir," Diane said, and her voice had gone smooth and careful in the way of someone executing a plan, "we do have hygiene protocols for our lobby staff, for everyone's safety." He reached into his jacket pocket. He carried handkerchiefs because Ruth had always teased him for it, said it was the most old-fashioned thing about him, and he'd always agreed, and he'd never stopped. He pressed it to his eyes without drama. Once, twice. The burn was already fading. He'd been more uncomfortable than this in his life, far more uncomfortable. "I understand you have protocols," he said. "My reservation is confirmed. I'd like my key." "We're still processing your documentation. You have my ID, you have my corporate card, you have the confirmation number. What exactly is being processed?" Carol stepped forward. Her first words of the afternoon. Sir, we want to make sure everything is in order. It is in order, he said. I confirmed the reservation 3 days ago. I have the email. The reservation is under my holding company. Everything is in order. We're just being thorough, she said. He looked at her. She held his gaze for about 2 seconds. His phone buzzed. He registered the vibration pattern without taking the phone out. He'd set different rhythms for different contacts years ago, a habit from long meetings where he needed to know who was calling without looking. This pattern was Patrick Osei, the general manager of this property. He did not reach for the phone. He left it in his pocket because Patrick's calling the CEO, and the CEO wasn't here right now. Right now, there was only a man in a gray coat who wanted to check in. And Darnell needed to know what Patrick would do when that call went unanswered. Whether he would come down, whether he would look at what was happening in his lobby and decide it was something he needed to be part of. He waited. He counted seconds without moving his lips. At 94 seconds, he heard the elevator, the bell, the doors parting. Footsteps on marble with direction in them, the stride of someone moving towards something with a purpose they'd decided before they left the elevator. Patrick Osei came around the corner of the lobby. Darnell had reviewed Patrick's file before this trip. 48 years old, 12 years in hospitality management, the last 3 as GM of Grandeur Palace. His numbers were real. Occupancy rates consistently above market. Event revenue up 14% over the past year. Guest satisfaction scores that hovered in the upper third of the chain's properties.
On paper, Patrick Osei was exactly the kind of general manager
you wanted running a flagship property. He was moving toward the front desk with the stride of a man responding to a situation. Controlled, professional, ready to resolve, and then he saw the situation. Darnell watched him see it. Patrick's stride changed a fraction of a second, a micro adjustment in pace, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't watching for it. He took in the line. He took in Diane's posture behind the desk. He took in Carol's position. He took Darnell standing at the counter with a handkerchief in his hand. Patrick Osei stopped walking. He stood approximately 10 feet away from an active situation at his front desk. A guest in cleared with his staff. Visible signs of distress. A line of people behind the guest watching. He stood there for about 3 full seconds, and then he turned around. He walked back toward the elevator. He stepped inside. The doors closed. Darnell stood at the counter and felt something clarify inside him. Not anger, not surprise. Something more like the particular feeling of a question becoming an answer. He'd been wondering about Patrick. He'd been looking at the numbers and trying to understand how 11 complaints could accumulate under a competent manager who cared about the property to see and wanted it to see how a fatback system designed to surface problems could produce problem after problem that never broke through to consequence. Now he understood. It wasn't that Patrick didn't see it. It was that when Patrick saw it, he turned around. Ray Tanner arrived 2 minutes after the elevator doors closed. He came from the security office behind the concierge alcove, a big man with the particular walk, some environments where size was a professional asset, security badge on his belt, radio in his left hand. He positioned himself at Dozel's right side, close enough to be pressure without being contact. "Sir," he said, is there a problem here?" "I'm checking in," Darnell said. "I don't have a problem. We've had a concern raised about a guest who may not have a valid reservation. My reservation is valid. It's been confirmed in your system. We're in the process of verifying." "You've had my documentation for 8 minutes," Darnell said. "My license corporate card, the confirmation number. What is the verification process for, exactly?" Ray looked at Diane. Something passed between them, not words. Something older than words, the shorthand of people who've run this play before. "Sir, if you'd step to the side." "I'll stay here," Darnell said. "I'm at the front of the line. I'll stay here until I have my key or until someone gives me a policy-based reason why I can't." Ray's jaw tightened. His hand moved toward the radio without lifting it. Across the lobby, Darnell was aware of a woman in the seating area who had been there when he arrived. Young, maybe 28, with a phone she'd been using for something before he'd drawn her attention. She was turned toward the front desk now, watching. He'd noticed her early in the visit. He noticed everything early. She had the particular stillness of someone who was paying close attention without wanting to appear to be paying close attention. She'd shifted her body angle twice in the past few minutes in ways that weren't casual. She was recording. He didn't react to this. He let it be what it was and turned his attention back to the counter. The line behind him had grown to 7 people. Some of them were watching openly. An older man near the back, with his arms folded, looking back and forth between Diane and Darnell, with an expression that was moving steadily from confusion towards some harder. A woman with a rolling bag who'd leaned slightly forward, her weight shifting onto her front foot, the way people lean when they're trying to understand something. Carol came back with a new strategy. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying the practiced concern of someone who'd been trained in de-escalation, but was applying it sideways. "I want to help you find the solution here. If there's been a miscommunication about the reservation—" "There's no miscommunication," Darnell said. "Sometimes these things happen. The online booking systems. I called and confirmed 3 days ago," he said. "I spoke to a reservations agent. Her name was Tamara. I can give you the time of the call." Carol blinked. Tamara was probably a real person who actually worked in reservations. Darnell had made the confirmation call specifically, so he'd have a name to offer. Carol recovered. "I'm going to need to verify that." "Verify it," he said. "I'll wait." She went to the phone at the end of the counter. Darnell stood still. He was good at standing still. He'd been practicing it for 52 years, in situations that were various versions of this one. The specific combination of being doubted, as dismissed, and treated as though the facts he was presenting were suspect not because of any deficiency in the facts themselves, but because of who was presenting them. He knew this feeling the way you know old weather, from the inside. Without having to think about it, his phone buzzed again. Patrick. Second call. He let it go. He reached for his phone deliberately enough that Carol, who had been watching from the end of the counter, took a small, involuntary step backward. He noted that too. He opened his messages and typed with the careful economy of a man who had decided what needed to happen next. "Sandra. Pull files. Grandeur Palace. All of them. Last 24 months. He put the phone away. Carol was staring at him from the end of the counter. "Who are you contacting?" she said. "Send a message," he said. "To who?" He looked at her steadily. "Someone who will want to know about this." Her face did something complicated. She hadn't figured it out yet. She was still operating inside the story she'd constructed. The story where Darnell was a problem to be managed and removed, and the complication she was dealing with was that the problem was managing itself very calmly and showing no signs of being moved. Across the lobby, the woman with the phone had shifted again. Darnell could see from his peripheral vision that the screen was facing outward now. Her lips were moving slightly. She was talking to someone, or to a camera, or to both. The line behind him had resolved itself through the second station, while Diane continued to not process his reservation. Only 3 people remained, and they were watching openly now. The older man with the folded arms had uncrossed them. He looked like he was considering saying something. Ray Tanner made his move at 4 minutes past 3. He stepped directly in front of Darnell, physical contact but unmistakably his body between Darnell and the counter. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the desk. No, you're creating a disruption." "I'm standing at a hotel counter asking to check in," Darnell said. "The people behind me have all been processed. The lobby is operating normally. I'm not disrupting any." Ray looked past him. The line was effectively gone. The second station had moved through everyone. It was just Darnell, standing at a counter, asking for something he'd already paid for. "Sir." Ray unclipped the radio from his belt. "You need to leave this property voluntarily. You have 3 minutes. After that, I'm contacting Atlanta PD." Darnell looked at him. "I drift." I'm going to stand here, she said, until I have my room key or a written policy-based explanation of why I'm being denied one. That's all I'm going to do. You can call whoever you need to call. Ray keyed the radio. Dispatch, this is Tanner, main lobby, requesting a unit to Grander Palace, possible trespassing situation, guest refusing to vacate, a crackle, a voice. Copy, Tanner. ETA approximately 8 minutes. 8 minutes. The ball in the specific way. Public spaces go quiet when everyone in them understands that something ain't real is happening. CMC and sounds were still there. The elevator chime, the cart rolling across marble, somewhere behind the concierge desk, the city through the glass. But the human sounds had dropped. Conversation that had been at a normal register was now at a murmur, or had stopped entirely. Stood in the center of it, he thought about Donna Wells, 34 years old. 6 years pushing linen carts through back corridors. This lobby didn't know existed. 4 years of exceeds expectations. 6 years of watching what he was watching right now, watching it happen to other people, watching it become so normal it stops registering as remarkable, and it became simply the weather of this place. And then 6 weeks ago, she had sat down at a feedback terminal on the 3rd floor and typed what she knew. She hadn't known if anyone would read it. He had read it. He was here because of it. He was not going to leave this lobby. Diane had stepped back from her station slightly. Her posture had shifted. The professional correctness was still intact on the surface, but something underneath it had changed, had gone tighter, a structure feeling, an unexpected load. She was watching him the way you watch something you were certain about that is beginning to be uncertain. He reached into his jacket, not his inside pocket, the outer one. He pulled out a business card, ivory white, clean, unshowy lettering. The kind of card that didn't need to be impressive because the information on it was sufficient. He set it on the counter. Diane looked at it, picked it up. Read it. He watched her face. He'd done enough of these visits to know that this was the moment. Not the reveal, because the reveal was just information. The moment was the 2 seconds after the information when a person decided what to do with it, when they could stop, when they could recalibrate, when they could say the thing that changes the trajectory of what's about to happen. She looked at the card. She looked at him. She put the card down. She smiled. Anyone can print a card. There it was. He'd expected it, or some version of it. He'd learned to expect the double down, the escalation past the point where escalation made any rational sense, the refusal to adjust even when adjustment was free and easy and available. He'd seen it in employees and in managers, and once memorably in a board member who'd had to be walked out of a meeting. He understood why it happened. When you've built a story around someone, when you've built it to a version of who they are and why they're here and what they want, the information that disproves the story doesn't just update the story. It threatens everything you've done based on the story. And that's not a logical calculation. It's a human one. He understood it. It still landed. He picked the card up from the counter. He looked at Carol. She looked back. Her face had gone careful. The certainty she'd arrived with had developed a crack in it, just a hairline, just enough that he could see it. She wasn't sure anymore. But she wasn't going to say so. Not with Diane beside her. Not with Ray Tanner holding a radio and a position. He put the card back in his pocket. He looked at the front desk, at the marble, at the lighting he'd approved in a conference room in Birmingham 18 months ago. At the fireplace, he'd specifically requested because he'd read that people feel more welcome when there's a fireplace. He thought about the motel in Savannah, 12 rooms, $40,000 borrowed on terms he'd had no real business agreeing to. The pipe that froze in January of the first year, the night the temperature dropped to 9 degrees and he'd slept in room 4 because there was no heat anywhere else and he couldn't afford to fix it until morning. He'd built from that. He'd built from that all the way to here. And here was this. He reached into his jacket, his phone. He found the contact and pressed call. Sandra Bloom picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Webb," she said, and her voice told him she'd already seen his message, already understood something was wrong. "I was about to call you. I pulled the files." How many? He said. A pause that lasted exactly the length of time it took Sandra to decide whether to soften the number. She didn't.
Soften it.
11, she said, closed his eyes. He opened them. Come to the property, he said. Now, bring everything. He ended the call. Ray Tanner's radio crackled with dispatch asking for a status update. Ray keyed it, said he was managing the situation, asked for a few more minutes. Darnell looked at him. Then he looked at Diane. Then he took the card out one more time, held it at the angle that caught the overhead light cleanly, set it on the counter, and left his hand resting on it. He said, quietly enough that only the people immediately around him could hear, I think we should wait for HR director before Edging does anything else. The lobby was very still. The fireplace put out its warmth into the silence. Outside, through the tall windows, Atlanta moved at its ordinary afternoon pace, cars and people, and pale October suns, the city, not knowing and not caring what was happening in this lobby, what had been decided in this lobby, what had been decided weeks ago, actually, in a back corridor on the 3rd floor, when a woman named Donna Wells sat down at a feedback terminal and typed the words she'd been carrying for 6 years. Darnell Webb stood at the counter of a hotel he owned. The card was on the marble under his hand. He waited. Sandra Bloom drove the way she did everything. Fast, precise, no wasted motion. She'd been in Birmingham when his message came through. 2 hours away under normal conditions. She made it in 91 minutes, which told him she'd read the complaint files on her phone at every red light and understood what she was driving toward before she arrived. He knew this because he knew Sandra. 8 years of working alongside Scoutson teaches you how they move inside a crisis. Sandra didn't panic and she didn't perform calm. She just worked steadily, with the particular focus of a woman who had learned that the most useful thing you could do in a bad situation was understand it precisely. She'd had 91 minutes to understand it precisely. He'd had longer. He'd been standing in the lobby for most of that time, which gave him the opportunity to do what he always did in hotels when nobody was watching him be the person who owned them. He watched. He counted. He filed things away in the careful internal record he'd been keeping for 23 years, since the manager in Macon, since the guest who'd been told certain types weren't welcome on weekends. The lobby had settled into a different kind of tension after his phone call. Not the hot tension of the confrontation, but something cooler and more watchful. Ray Tanner had not called Atlanta PD back after the initial request. He'd keyed his radio twice and thought better of it both times, and was now standing 8 feet from Darnell, with the expression of a man ethnic in his head and not enjoying the results. Carol Sims had retreated to the back office. Diane was at her station, or appearing to be at her station, performing the motions of work, while actually performing the most motions of someone trying to look like they weren't watching the man at the end of the counter. The woman in the seating area was still there. She'd been there since before Darnell arrived. He'd clocked her in his first scan of the lobby, the way he clocked everyone. Young, late 20s, travel clothes, phones she'd been using for what looked like note-taking or content work of some kind. She'd shifted when the situation started developing. Now she was turned full toward the front desk with her phone, at an angle that wasn't casual. She was live streaming. He'd figured this out about 20 minutes ago. The small signs, the occasional slight adjustment of her angle, the way her lips moved briefly now and then, as if saying something shortness, which was the stillness of a person managing a frame rather than simply watching. He didn't react to it. He let it be what it was. His phone had buzzed twice more since the Sandra call. Both times, Patrick Osei. He'd let both calls go. The second one had come with a text that said, Mr. Webb, I'm aware there's a situation at the front desk. I'm working on a resolution from upstairs. Please bear with us. He'd read this and put the phone back in his pocket. Patrick was upstairs. Patrick was aware of a situation at the front desk. Patrick was working on a resolution from upstairs. He kept thinking about this, about the specific choice embedded in that message. The choice to handle it remotely. to send words down instead of coming down himself. And underneath that choice, something Darnell had been turning over since the moment the elevator doors closed. Patrick had come out. He had seen. And then he had made a decision, in the 3 seconds between seeing and turning around, that the resolution he wanted to manage could be managed from a distance. That was not a small thing. That was, in some ways, the whole thing. Sandra came through the lobby doors at 18 minutes past 4. She walked the way Sandra always walked, like she was already late for the next thing, regardless of what time it was, tablet under one arm and a leather folder under the other. Silver hair she'd stopped dyeing 3 years ago because she said it took too long and she had too much to do. She scanned the lobby in one pass, found Darnell immediately, and came directly to him without stopping at the front desk. That was the right call, he noted it. "Mr. Webb," she said. "Sandra." She looked at his face, specifically at his eyes, which were still slightly red at the rims from the sanitizer. Her jaw tightened in the specific way it tightened when she was controlling a reaction. "Your eyes," she said. "Sanitize," he said. She sprayed it toward my face, hygiene protocols. A pause, short and very controlled. "All right," she said. And her voice went flat in the way it went flat when she was setting aside what she felt so she could do what needed doing. He'd heard that voice in board meetings and termination proceedings, and once in a hospital waiting room when one of their regional managers had a stroke and they'd needed to handle 16 things simultaneously. It was her working voice. He trusted it completely. "The files," he said. She opened that tablet. The complaint records were already pulled up, organized by date, each one flagged with its resolution status. She'd formatted them in transit. Of course she had. 11 formal complaints, she said, filed through the anonymous feedback system over 24 months. 8 were reviewed and closed by Patrick Osei. 2 were handled at the assistant manager level by Carol Sims. 1, filed 9 weeks ago, is marked pending with no action taken. Who filed the pending one? She looked at him. A guest named Bernard Hayward, business traveler, Atlanta for a conference. He reported that front desk staff requested his ID 3 times and questioned whether his corporate card was legitimate. He checked out after 1 night of a 3-night booking. Darnell was quiet. 9 weeks ago, he said, "Yes, under my ownership. Using the system I built so this kind of thing would be caught. Yes." He looked at the tablet, at Bernard Hayward's complaint sitting in the queue with a pending flag and nothing else. 9 weeks. The man had taken the time to write down what happened to him. He'd used the system. He had trusted the systems, and the system had held his words in a queue for 9 weeks, while the front desk that had treated him badly kept running the same plays. "Where's Patrick?" he said. "Upstairs," Sandra said. "He's been calling you." "I know." "Call him down." She dialed. While the phone rang, Darnell looked across the lobby toward the seating area. The young woman with the camera had shifted precision again. She was capturing from the full desk from a new angle. Her viewer count, which he could roughly estimate from the brightness of comments appearing as a small moving bar on the side of her screen, had been growing steadily for the past hour. Whatever happened in the next 10 minutes was going to happen in front of a lot of people, he thought. He thought, good. Patrick Osei came out of the elevator, 47 seconds after Sandra's call. He'd made the decision somewhere between the upper floors and the lobby about how this was going to go. Darnell could see the decision in his stride. Confident, measured, the walk of a general manager who has dealt with difficult situations before and knows how to land in them with authority intact. He was going to take control of the narrative. He was going to be the person who resolved this. He was going to thank the guest for his patience and offer something meaningful and escort him personally to his suite. And that was going to be that. He crossed the lobby. He looked at Sandra first because Sandra was new and unknown to him, and that registered as a variable. Then he looked at Darnell. And something happened that took about 2 seconds and was the most important thing Darnell observed all day. Patrick's stride changed. A half-step adjustment, barely visible, the kind of thing that might not register at all if you weren't watching very carefully. His face ran through something. A recognition forming, searching for its source, finding something and testing it against what was in front of him. The gray coat, the worn shoes, the handkerchief. A man who had been standing at his front desk for over an hour, calm as weather, in clothing that didn't fit this lobby. And then it landed. Darnell saw the moment it landed. Patrick Osei knew who he was. He didn't know how long Patrick had known. Maybe since he came out of the elevator the first time, the time he'd turned around. Maybe it had come to him in pieces over the past hour, assembling itself from fragments. 2 years ago, they'd been at the same event, the Atlanta Hospitality Excellence Dinner, and they'd talked for 20 minutes about culture building in mid-sized TIS chains. And Patrick had asked smart questions, and Darnell had given him honest answers, and they'd shaken hands at the end of the evening, and Patrick had said he'd remember the conversation. He'd apparently also remembered the face. Patrick kept walking. He absorbed whatever he'd just understood and kept his body moving because stopping would have been worse. He arrived in front of Darnell and Sandra with the posture of a man carrying more than his expressions were showing. "Mr. Webb," he said. His voice was nearly steady. Not entirely. "Patrick," Darnell said. A beat. "I want to say something to you before we talk about what happens next," Darnell said. "I was in this lobby when you came out of the elevator an hour ago. I watched you look at the situation. I watched you go back inside." Patrick said nothing. "I need you to know I saw that," Darnell said. "We'll come back to it." Something in Patrick's face shifted. Not collapse, not defensiveness. Something more like a man recognizing that the door he thought was closed had been open the whole time. "Yes, sir," he said. Darnell nodded at Sandra. "Show him." Sandra turned the tablet toward Patrick. 11 complaint records. Dates, descriptions, resolution notes, his name on 8 of them. The word resolved appearing over and over, small and definitive. A word that meant nothing had been resolved at all. Patrick looked at the screen. He looked at it the way you look at something you already know is there, but hoped might have changed in the time since you last checked. It hadn't changed. Diane Hartwell had been watching this from the end of the counter. She'd come out from behind the desk at some point in the past few minutes. Not far, just to the curved end of the counter. And she was standing at the edge of the conversation with her arms crossed in the posture of a woman who hadn't understood everything that was happening, but was beginning to. Her face had been going through adjustments for the past several minutes. The professional composure was still there on the surface, but something underneath it was moving. Darnell turned to face her. He walked to the counter, stood in front of her, the same spot as before. He reached into his pocket and put the card on the counter. She looked at it. She'd seen it already. Her expression said so. "You showed me that," she said. "I did," he said. "And you told me anyone can print a card." A pause. "Look at it one more time, please." She picked it up. He waited while she read it. "This hotel is an Apex property," he said. "Has been for 3 years. You've been front desk manager for 11 years, which means you were here when the ownership changed. When we acquired the chain, there was a company-wide orientation for all senior staff." Sandra pulled up a document on the tablet. The orientation acknowledgement form. She turned the screen toward Diane. At the top of the form, beneath the Apex Hospitality letterhead, was a photograph. Darnell at a podium, mid-sentence, the particular looks of someone in the middle of a welcome address. He'd been wearing a suit that day. His hair had been cut the week before. He looked like what he was. He looked nothing like the man who had walked through the lobby doors 4 hours ago in a gray coat and worn shoes. Diane looked at the photograph. She looked at Darnell. She looked at the photograph again. The color left her face. Not all at once. Gradually, the way light leaves a room when the sun moves rather than when someone turns off a switch. "I signed that form," Sandra said, and her voice was factual, not cruel. "August 3 years ago. Your signature is on page 3. Diane's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "You didn't recognize me," Darnell said. "I understand that. I wasn't dressed the way I'm dressed in that photograph." I wasn't of arriving with a team or schedule. I walked in through your door like anyone else, and you looked at me, and you decided something about me in the first few seconds. And then you kept deciding. Every time there was an opportunity to stop, to recalibrate, to simply process a valid reservation for a guest who had done everything right, you made a different choice. He wasn't raising his voice. He never raised his voice in moments like this. Ruth had once told him that was the thing that made him genuinely hard to argue with Ombi. Not that he was loud or insistent, but that he was quieter when he was most serious. So you had to lean in to hear him, and leaning in made it harder to dismiss what he was saying. "I need this job," Diane said. It came out smaller than anything she'd said all afternoon. "I know," he said. "I have." She stopped. We'll talk about what comes next," he said, "but I need you to hear this first." She looked at him. Her arms had uncrossed at some point. She was standing with her hands at her sides, and she looked younger than she had behind the counter, and she looked like someone who had just the story she had been living inside collapse in real time. "For 24 months, he said, "this front trek has generated 11 formal complaints. 11 people used the system that my company built specifically so that what happened to them could be recorded and addressed. 11 people trusted that writing it down would mean something." He picked up the card from the counter. He held it up briefly, then put it in his pocket. "Bernard Hayward filed a complaint 9 weeks ago," he said. "He checked out after one night of a 3-night stay. He's in Chicago right now, and he doesn't know yet that anyone ever read what he wrote." Diane looked at the counter. "He trusted the system," Darnell said. "That's the thing about trust. It's an act people perform before they know whether it was worth performing. He wrote down what happened to him, and he sent it, and he hoped someone would see it. It sat in a queue for 9 weeks, while that had treated him badly kept working. He paused. "That's what we're talking about," he said. "Not just today. Today is one afternoon. What we're talking about is 24 months of people who needed something simple. To check into a hotel, to be treated with honor or professional courtesy, and instead got this." He gestured with one hand, a small economical gesture toward the space between them. "This," he said again. Diane's eyes had filled. She didn't let it spill over. She held it there, right at the edge. Carol Sims had reappeared from the back office. She'd been back there long enough to have heard fragments of this through whatever gap she'd left in the door. She came out with the look of a person who had spent 20 minutes deciding between options and hadn't fully decided yet. Her posture was rigid in the particular way someone used as armor measure. "Mr. Webb," she said, "I want to be clear that my role was procedural. I followed the resolution process as I understood." "Carol," Sandra said. Not harshly, just her name with a particular weight to it. "You were the resolution officer on 2 of the 11 complaints. I'll need to go through those files with you separately." Carol's mouth closed. Ray Tanner was against the far wall. He'd been there for the past 40 minutes, which was probably the longest 40 minutes of his career, standing in one spot, watching the situation he'd initiated transform into something he couldn't have predicted. His radio was clipped back on his belt. His arms were at his sides. He was looking at a point on the floor between his feet with the concentration of a man trying to think clearly in a loud room. Except the room wasn't loud, which made the thinking more visible and more painful. Darnell moved to the seating area, not to the chairs near the fireplace this time, to the cluster of low seats in the center of the lobby, under the highest point of the ceiling, where the light was best and the sight was open in every direction. He sat down, a normal chair, a chair in a hotel lobby that he owned. He looked at Patrick. "Sit down," he said. Patrick sat. Sandra sat to his left. Carol had followed at a distance and stood behind Patrick's chair. Ray stayed against the wall. Diane remained at the edge of the counter, not behind it anymore, just standing at the end of it the way you stand in a space when you're no longer sure you belong there. In the seating area across the lobby, the young woman with the phone had moved. Supply, 3 feet closer, the camera angle, something in it liked. The viewer count on her screen which Darnell could see clearly now, was over 9,000. Patrick, he said. Before we talk about what happens next, I want to tell you something. Patrick sat very straight. The straightness of a man using posture to maintain something that everything else was threatening to take. 5 years ago, Darnell said, I walked into this hotel as a private citizen. This hotel had different owners then. I had a confirmed reservation. They told me the hotel was full, and I stood in this lobby and watched the front desk agent give that same room to the person who walked in after me. He let that sit. 2 years after that, when the Apex Wizax system came through and Grandeur Palace was on the property list, I didn't hesitate. I wanted to change this place from the inside. I put systems in place, the complaint infrastructure, the feedback terminals, the resolution protocols. I wanted there to be a record. I wanted there to be accountability. He looked at the tablet in Sandra's hands. 24 months says, in 11 complaints, under my ownership. I saw my systems were running. Patrick's eyes went to the tablet. You signed off on 8 of them, Darnell said. I reviewed them according to the resolution guidelines. Patrick said. What resolution did you reach? Darnell said. For any of them. A pause. I determined that the complaints didn't meet the threshold for formal disciplinary action, Patrick said. His voice was careful. The voice of a man who knows he's describing something indefensible and is trying to find the description that makes it less so. Darnell said. Another pause longer. The complaints were often lacking specific evidence, Patrick said. Witness corroboration. Documentation. They were guest accounts, Darnell said, of how they were treated. That was the evidence. That was the point of the system. Patrick looked at his hands. You came out of the elevator an hour ago, Darnell said. You saw what was happening at your front sped deck. You turned around. Sir, I'm not asking you to defend it, Darnell said. I watched you do it. I'm telling you, I watched you do it because I need you to understand that I know what happened in this building today was not an accident. It was not one employee making a bad call. It was a system that has been working exactly the way someone allowed it to work. Patrick looked up. I'm not firing you today, Darnell said. Something moved through Patrick's face. A complicated thing. Not quite relief. Not quite hope. Something that didn't have a clean name. Because firing you today would be the easy answer, Darnell said. And the easy answer here isn't the right one. You're going to be the person who fixes this. You're going to contact every person who filed one of those 11 complaints. Everyone. You're going to find them, you're going to talk to them, and you're going to hear what happened to them in their own words. And then you're going to apologize. Not on behalf of the hotel. As a person. Because you had the files in your hands and you closed them. Patrick said nothing. That's not a punishment, Darnell said. That's accountability. There's a difference between those two things, and I need you to learn it. Patrick nodded. Once. Slowly. I'll do it, he said. I know you will, Darnell said. Because you don't have another option, but also because I think you know it's right. And I think there's a version of you that knew it was right when you were closing those files and chose not to act on it. Patrick looked at him. That version of you, Darnell said, is the one I'm giving a chance to be different. The lobby had gone very quiet, not silent. The ambient sounds of a working hotel continued underneath everything, but the human sounds had dropped to a murmur or had stopped entirely. The man who'd been watching from the fireplace chairs had not moved. An older couple near the elevator bank were standing very still, luggage at their feet, watching without apology. Across the lobby, the viewer count was over 12,000. Darnell looked at Diane. Miss Hartwell, he said. She straightened. You've been with this property for 11 years, he said, Dud. That's 11 years of guests coming through those doors with bags and tired eyes, and all they needed was someone to hand them a key and mean it when they said, welcome. 11 years of chances to do that. She held very still. Today you sprayed a substance into a guest's face, he said. You called security on a guest who had a valid reservation, a valid ID, and a valid corporate card. You told the people around you that he was running a scam. And when he showed you his business card with his name and his company on it, you told him anyone could print a card. Her eyes had filled again. "I'm terminating your employment effective today," he said. "Sandra will go through the terms with you. They'll be fair. But I need you to understand something before that conversation happens." She looked at him. "This didn't start today," he said. 11 complaints, 24 months. That's 11 times that someone came through those doors and left feeling like they didn't belong here. Some of them probably didn't file a complaint. Some of them just didn't come back. You'll never know how many of them there were." He paused. "I'm not asking you to be a different person than you are," he said. "But I am telling you that the choices you made today and the choices you made over 24 months have consequences. Real ones. For real people." Diane nodded. It was a small movement, but it was real. She turned and walked back behind the counter. She started opening the small drawer where she kept her things, doing it with the careful efficiency of someone who is taking their time, because they need the task to be something to do with their hands. Ray Tanner stepped away from the wall. He came forward slowly, the way you come forward when you're not sure of the. He was holding his security badge in one hand, unclipped from his belt, holding it the way you hold something you're not sure belongs to you anymore. "Mr. Webb," he said. Darnell looked at him. "I was acting on what I believed to be a legitimate concern," Ray said. "I want you to know I wasn't." He stopped. Started again. "I wasn't thinking about it clearly." "What were you thinking about?" Darnell said. Ray looked at the badge in his hand. "I was thinking about what Diane told me. I was thinking about what the situation looked like. I wasn't thinking about what it actually was." "There's a difference between those two things," Darnell said. "Yes, sir." "You're suspended pending review," Darnell said. "The review will be fair. You'll have the opportunity to give your full account. Whether you back from depends on what that account says and what you do with it." Ray set the badge on the coffee table. "Keep it," Darnell said. "Bring it with you to the review." Ray picked it up, nodded once, stepped back. The Atlanta PD unit arrived at 7 minutes past 5. 2 officers, a senior and a junior, coming through the lobby doors with the alert wariness of people who'd been told there was a trespassing situation and had arrived to find something considerably more complex. They located Ray Tanner first, because that was the name they'd spoken to. Then they found the gathering of people in the center of the lobby. The senior officer approached.
"Mr. Tanner,
"We got a call about a trespassing situation,"
that situation has been resolved."
Darnell said. The officer looked at him, at Sandra, at Patrick, still seated. "And you are?" "Darnell Webb. I'm the owner of this hotel. Sandra Bloom is my head of human resources. We've been addressing an internal personnel matter. There's no trespassing situation." The officer looked at Ray. Ray said nothing. "We received a call," the officer said again, more carefully. "You did," Darnell said. "And I appreciate the response. But I want to be clear about the nature of that call. Your security officer requested police presence to remove a guest from the lobby of the hotel. That guest was me. I had a valid reservation for Suite 1201 confirmed 3 days ago, paid in full. I never refused to leave. I asked to check in. That's the full account." The officer looked at his partner. She had her notepad out. "We'll need to file a report," he said. "Please do," Darnell said. "I'd appreciate having it on record." They spent 6 minutes in the lobby, asked a few procedural questions, filed what they needed to file, and left. After they were gone, the lobby was quiet for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. Then Darnell looked toward the housekeeping corridor. He'd noticed her 20 minutes ago. She'd come through the lobby on her way somewhere, and had stopped at the entrance to the service corridor when she saw the gathering. She'd been standing there for a while, not moving, watching. He'd recognized her from the employee photo in her file, Donna Wells. 34 years old, 6 years in this building. 4 years of exceeds expectations from supervisors who hadn't thought to offer her more. The person who had sat down at a feedback terminal and typed what she knew because she needed it to be on record somewhere. Even if she didn't know if anyone read those records. She was watching him from across the lobby. He walked toward her. She saw him coming. Her posture shifted slightly. the instinctive stasis of someone who isn't sure what's coming. He stopped in front of her. "Miss Wells," he said. She looked up at him. "I received your report," he said. 6 weeks ago." Her face changed completely. The careful neutral expression she'd been maintaining cracked open into something unguarded and then went careful again, like a window briefly opened and then brought back to a crack. "I want you to know that what happened here today began with what you wrote," he said. "Everything that happens next begins there, too." She opened her mouth, closed it. "I know you filed it anonymously," he said. "That's how the system works, and that's how it's going to stay. But I wanted you to know that I know, and I wanted to say thank you." She looked at him for a long moment. "I didn't know if anyone would read it," she said. Her voice was low, direct. "I read it," he said. She nodded, a small, complete nod. "The kind that ends a sentence that has been waiting a long time to be finished." He nodded back. He turned and walked toward the elevator. Behind him heard the lobby begin its slow return to ordinary sounds, the ambient hum of a working hotel coming back up to its normal register. Voices. A cart somewhere. The elevator bell. He was thinking about the 11 files. About Bernard Hayward checking out after one night and not knowing anyone would ever read his complaint. About the 4 consecutive years of exceeds expectations that nobody had thought to do anything with. About Patrick Osei turning around and walking back into the elevator. About all the things that happened when nobody important was watching. He pressed the button for the 12th floor. The doors closed. He rode up alone. He was thinking about what needed to happen next, and there was a lot of it, and it was going to take longer than anyone was going to be comfortable with. The board, the legal review, the restructuring of the complaint protocol, the calls Patrick was going to have to make to 11 people who had trusted a system and been let down by it. All of it. All of it. He thought, this is the work, thought. Ruth was right. It's always the work. The elevator doors opened on 12. He walked down the corridor to suite 1201 and let himself in and stood for a moment just inside the door, in the room he'd paid for 3 days ago and had been trying to reach all afternoon, and he let himself be still. Outside the windows, Atlanta was going from afternoon to evening, the sky changing color in the slow, reliable way skies do regardless of what's happening in the buildings beneath them. The city going about its business. All those people moving through all those lobbies, all those front desks, all those moments where someone either saw them or didn't. He sat on the edge of the bed. He picked up his phone. He started making the calls that needed to be made. The board call started at 9 the next morning. Darnes was already in the lobby at 7, same gray coat, same chair near the center of the room. He had coffee in his house phone and the 11 printed files Sandra had left outside his door at 6 in a sealed folder. He'd been awake since 4:30, not anxiously. Just awake. This is the way he was always awake before something that mattered, his body understanding before his mind caught up that the day ahead required him to be present from the beginning of it. He'd read all 11 files before the coffee was cold. He read them in the order they were filed. Oldest to newest, which meant he read the story chronologically. The first complaint was from 22 months ago. A guest named Arthur Coleman, traveling for work, who had written in careful measured sentences that he'd been asked to move to a different check-in line without explanation, had waited 30 while guests who arrived after him were processed, and had finally been told his Olze reservation was showing a discrepancy that turned out, upon further examination, not to exist. He'd written, "I've stayed in a lot of hotels. I know what this is. I'm writing it down because I think someone should know it happened here. Someone should know it happened here." Darnell read that sentence twice, then he moved to the next file, and the one after that. 10 more people who had used the system he'd built, who had taken the time to write down what happened to them in language that was careful and specific, and, in several cases, still raw, in the way things are raw when the wound is recent. A woman named Patricia Green, who had been told her suite booking was unconfirmed and had stood at the counter for 40 minutes before a supervisor found the reservation exactly where it should have been. A man named James Whitmore, who had been followed by Ray Tanner, through the lobby and into the elevator, and had stood in the elevator with a security guard who watched press a button for his floor and said nothing and did nothing and simply watched. By the time he finished the last file, the Atlanta morning was pale gold through the lobby windows, and the first shift staff were arriving through the service entrance, and the hotel was waking up around him the way hotels wake up, gradually, system by system, the coffee stations and the front desk computers and the phones that started ringing before the day felt ready for them. He sat with the files in his lap. He thought about all 11 people, and the moment each of them had made the decision to write it down. That decision was not a small one. It required believing, against the available evidence, that writing it down would mean something. That some version of accountability existed somewhere in the system, that the record would be more than a record. He owed them something for that belief. He was going to spend whatever it took to be worth it. The board call began at 9 and ran until 11:40, which was 20 minutes longer than the scheduled time and 40 minutes longer than Darnell had wanted it to be. 7 board members. 4 he'd appointed himself when he took over the chain. 3 who'd been part of the previous ownership structure and had stayed on through the acquisition. The inherited 3 were the ones who made the call long. Gerald Fitch spoke first after Darnell had given the factual summary of the previous afternoon. Fitch was 61 years old and had been on boards of various kinds for long enough that his primary skill had become the ability to make the management of risk sound like the exercise of wisdom. He had a gift for this. Darnell had spent 3 years watching him deploy it. "The exposure here is real," Fitch said. "The video is at 420,000 views as of this morning. We're getting press inquiry. And we now have a terminated employee, whose attorney has apparently already been in contact with Sandra. The attorney contacted us at 7 this morning," Sandra confirmed. She was in the conference room down the hall from Darnell's suite on the same call. "Wrongful termination. Preliminary inquiry. Not a formal filing yet." "What?" "Which is exactly what I'd expect," Fitch said. "Darnell, I want to be direct with you. The complaint history creates a problem. If 11 complaints over 24 months were closed without disciplinary action, Hartwell's attorneys are going to argue that the company established a pattern of tolerating this conduct. That's not a frivolous argument." "It's not," Darnell agreed. A pause on the call. People waiting for the rest of the sentence. "It's not a frivolous argument," he said again, "because it's partially accurate. The complaint process failed. We established a record of non-response. That's a fact, and it's going to be treated as one." Silence. "Which is why," he said, "we're not settling." Gerald Fitch made a sound that wasn't quite words. "Settling would mean paying to make the story go away," Darnell said. "And the story doesn't deserve to go away." 11 people wrote down what happened to them and trusted that the record meant something. If we write a check to make the legal exposure smaller, we are telling them it didn't. I'm not willing to do that. Eleanor Marsh spoke then. Eleanor was one of the inherited board members, and the one Darnell respected most among the 3. She was precise and she was honest, and she disagreed with him productively, which was rarer than it should have been in rooms like this. "I understand the principle," she said. "I want to push on the practicality. If we go to a hearing and the complaint history comes into evidence, a tribunal could find partial liability regardless of whether the termination was warranted. We'd be paying anyway. We'd just be paying more and later and with worse press around it." "We might," Darnell said. "I've talked to legal. I understand what partial liability could look like. I'm still not settling." "Why?" she said. Not challenging, actually asking. He thought about Arthur Coleman, about Patricia Green, about James Whitmore standing in an elevator while a security guard watched him press his floor button, because the people who use that complaint system deserve to have their complaints be part of the official record, he said. Not buried in a settlement agreement with a non-disclosure clause. If this goes to a hearing, those 11 files go into evidence. They become part of the public record. Arthur Coleman's complaint gets read out loud in a proceeding. That matters. That's worth the cost. The call was quiet for a moment. Eleanor said, "All right." Fitch said, "I want it noted that I recommended settlement." "Noted," Darnell said. "Let's talk about what comes next." What came next took another 40 minutes and covered every property chain. New complaint protocol. Response required within 72 hours. Mandatory escalation to senior management at 48. Independent third-party review for any complaint involving differential treatment. Mystery guest program launching within 60 days. Mandatory recertification for all front desk staff across all 19 properties, not just Grandeur Palace. Patrick Osei sat at the far end of the conference room table and took notes throughout. He'd arrived before the call started. He hadn't been asked to be there for the board portion. He'd come anyway, which told Darnell something he filed away in the careful accounting he was doing of Patrick. When the board call ended and the room cleared to just the three of them, Darnell looked at Patrick. "You have names," he said. 11, Patrick said. "I've already started looking for contact information. I have current dates or 3. Gonna take more work." "Starts for us, the only you can read," Darnell said. "Document everything. What you said. Whether they agreed to talk, whether they didn't, if they don't want to talk to me. Write it down," Darnell said. "That's part of the record, too." Patrick nodded. He opened his notebook to a page that already had notes on it, which meant he'd been thinking about this before anyone told him to, which was another entry in the accounting. "One more thing," Darnell said. Patrick looked up. "When you make those calls," Darnell said, "you're not calling on behalf of the company. You're calling as a person who had their complaint in his hands and closed it. Lead with that. Don't lead with your title." Patrick was quite quiet for a moment. "That's going to be a hard call to make," he said. "Yes," Darnell said, "it is." The message from Diane Hartwell's attorney arrived at 12:40. Sandra brought it to him in the conference room. She set her phone on the table and let him read it himself, which was the right call. It was formal and careful and said exactly what Gerald Fitch had predicted. Wrongful termination, the complaint history as evidence of tacit acceptance. Diane Hartwell had followed patterns of conduct that had been established and reinforced by the company's failure to act. The termination was therefore without just cause. Darnell read it twice. He pushed the phone back across the table. "She has parts of a case," Sandra said. "She does," he said. "The tribunal could look at the 24 months and conclude." "Sandra," he said, "I know. I've already run through it. The board wants to settle. The board has noted their preference," he said. "We're responding to the filing. Transparently. We acknowledge the complaint process failed. We acknowledge the company bears responsibility for that failure. We also defend the termination because what she did on the day in question meets the standard, regardless of what the company do beforehand. Both things are true. We say both things." Sandra picked up her pen. "Opposing counsel will use the admission in the hearing. I know. It could cost us on the secondary question." "It probably will," he said. "That's the cost, being honest about what happened. We pay it." She looked at him with the expression she wore when she thought he was right and was already calculating what being right was going to require. He'd been seeing that expression for 8 years. "Okay," she said. "Tell me how do you want the response drafted?" He told her. James Whitfield took the case. Darnell had known his name for several years, had followed a case he'd handled that involved discriminatory practices at a regional hotel chain, had noted the way Whitfield worked. Precise, patient, uninterested in theater. He called him that afternoon and talked for 14 minutes, and Whitfield listened without interrupting, which told Darnell what he needed to know. "The admission of systemic failure is going to be the difficult part," Whitfield said when he finished. "I know," Darnell said. "The complaint history creates a causation argument that's hard to fully defeat." "I'm not trying to defeat it," Darnell said. "I'm trying to respond to it honestly. The failure happened. The company is responsible for the failure. That's separate from whether the termination was warranted. I need someone who can hold both of those things at the same time without collapse one into the other." A pause. That's a harder case to make than a straight defense, Whitfield said. I know, Darnell said. You might lose a portion of it. I might, Darnell said. Tell me if you can do it. Another pause longer. I'll take it, Whitfield said. Carol Sims came to the conference room on the second morning. She knocked first, waited in the doorway until Sandra waved her in. She sat across Darnell, with her hands folded on the table and the look of a woman who had spent the night in a conversation with herself and arrived at something she hadn't planned to say. She said it anyway. When the complaints came to me, she said, the two I handled. I knew they were real, I could tell. The way people wrote them, the specific details, the kind of language that comes from something that actually happened to you. Darnell waited. I summarized them, sent them, Patrick, with a resolution note, she said. The way I'd been trained to do it. But the note I wrote it to make the file easy to close. I could have written it differently. I chose not to. She looked at the table for a moment. I've been trying to understand why, she said. Why I made that choice. And I think the honest answer is that closing a file was easier than the alternative. The alternative was escalating a complaint about contact on my own front desk, about people I work with every day. And I told myself the resolution process would handle it, and I knew when I told myself that it was a way of not handling it. The room was quiet. I don't know why I'm telling you this, she said. It makes my situation worse. Why are you telling me? He asked. She thought about it for a moment. A real moment, not a performed one. Because you read Arthur Coleman's complaint out loud yesterday, she said. In the lobby, you said his name, and I thought about the fact that I'd had his file in my hands. I'd summarized it. I'd sent it up the chain. I knew his name and I buried it anyway. She stopped. He trusted the system, Darnell said. I know, she said. I know he did. That's not nothing, he said. What you just told me, it's not enough by itself. But it's a start. She looked at him. What happens to my positions? You're staying on, he said. Demoted to the front desk associate. 12 months probation. Monthly reviews with Sandra. You'll go through the full recertification program. She nodded. It was a careful nod, the nod of someone accepting terms they know are fair and more lenient than they might have been. If there's another complaint on your watch, he said, a real one, the kind you can tell from the language, you escalate it. That's the only thing I need from you going forward. You escalate it. Yes, she said. She stood up. She walked out. Sandra looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a few seconds. There was nothing that needed saying. The weeks that followed were not quiet. The videos would spread as the way things spread when they could catch something real. Not just the views, which climbed past 1 million in the first week and kept climbing, but the quality of attention it generated. People weren't just watching it. They were watching it multiple times, sending it to specific people, writing in comments about their own versions of the same lobby ISIS, the same counter, the same 5 seconds of someone's face deciding who they were. Darnell did 2 interviews in the first week, both short, both on his own terms. He said the same things he'd said in the lobby in a slightly more organized form. The complaint process had failed. The termination was warranted. Both things were true. The company was going to do what it should have done from the beginning. He wasn't interested in talking about anything else, and he said so directly, which journalists generally respected more than evasion. Gerald Fitch sent a 7-page memo about narrative management and settlement strategy. Darnell read it carefully and responded in 2 sentences. Eleanor Marsh called directly. They talked for 45 minutes. She still thought he was taking on unnecessary risk. He still thought she was wrong about what was necessary. They agreed to disagree in the way that people agree to disagree when they respect each other enough to keep the disagreement honest. Patrick O.C. made his first call on the 3rd day. Bernard Hayward was in Chicago. Patrick reached him on a Tuesday morning, introduced himself, explained who he was and why he was calling. Then he said, I'm the person who had your complaint in my hands. I marked it pending and took no action. I want to tell you directly that I was wrong to do that. And if you're willing to talk, I want to hear what happened to you. Hayward was quiet for a moment. Then he talked for 53 minutes. Patrick took notes the whole time. He sent them to Sandra that night with a single line at the top. He deserved better than what we gave him. By the end of the second week, Patrick had made contact with 9 of the 11 people. 6 had agreed to talk. 2 had declined. 1 had declined twice on 2 separate calls on 2 separate days. Patrick had said the same thing both times. I understand. I'm going to note in my report that I called and that you declined, and I want you to know that your complaint will be part of the formal review, regardless of whether we speak. The second time, the person had said, "At least someone's keeping a record now." Patrick had sat with that sentence for a long time before he wrote it down. He wrote it down anyway. Donna Wells said yes to the new role on a Wednesday afternoon. She said it in Sandra's office, across a desk, in a conversation Sandra had initiated it after reviewing Donna's full employment file without context about who she was or what she'd done. Just the file. 4 consecutive years of exceeds expectations. The maintenance issue she'd flagged in room 847 that would have caused significant water damage. The 3 new housekeeping staff members she'd trained over 18 months. All of whom had rated her as the most effective trainer they'd worked with. Sandra had called Darnell after she read the file. "Has anyone ever offered her a path forward?" she'd asked. "Pull her current position and tell me what the next step looks like," he'd said. The floor operations coordinator role was lateral in pay and vertical in everything else. Responsibility across 3 departments: scheduling, training oversight. The kind of visibility that led to the kind of opportunities that led to something different from 6 years of back corridors. Nobody had apparently thought to offer it to Donna Wells. Sandra offered it. Donna said yes. Then she said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Sandra said. "Did he know it was me? Who filed the report?" Sandra had thought about how to answer this. "He knew that the report came from someone who worked in this building," she said. "Someone who'd been watching for a long time and had decided the watching wasn't enough anymore." Donna looked at the window. "Is that a yes?" she said. "It's everything I'm able to tell you," Sandra said. Donna was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She accepted the role. The deposition was on a Tuesday in the 5th week. Darnell sat across from Diane Hartwell's attorneys for 4 hours in a conference room that smelled like the specific combination of recycled air and fresh coffee that deposition rooms always smell like. As if someone had decided that combination was neutral enough not to give either side an advantage. The attorneys were good. Darnell had expected them to be. The complaint history argument was well constructed, and they deployed it methodically, document by document, building the case that 24 months of non-response had established a culture that Diane Hartwell had been operating within rather than creating. They were not wrong about this. Heck, when they asked him whether the company to act on prior complaints had created conditions that made Diane Hartwell's conduct foreseeable, he said, yes, that is accurate. When they asked whether a reasonable employee might have concluded that this type of conduct was tolerated, he said, a reasonable employee might have drawn that conclusion. I should have made it impossible for them to draw it. I didn't. James Whitfield was very still beside him throughout. When aptly asked would all of this, termination without prior progressive discipline was appropriate, Darnell said, Mrs. Hartwell's conduct on the day in question included spraying a substance into a guest's face. It included characterizing a guest with a valid reservation as a criminal in front of other guests and staff. It included calling law enforcement to remove a guest from a hotel in which he's had every right to be. Those actions were deliberate. They were sustained over approximately 1 hour, and they were not the result of a split-second judgment error. They were a series of choices. The company's failure to address prior complaints created conditions. It did not make those choices for her. She made them. Termination was appropriate. The room was quiet after that. The lead attorney made a note and moved to the next question. The hearing was 6 weeks after the afternoon in the lobby. It was an employment tribunal, the formal first step, and Darnell attended in person. He sat at the respondents' table with Whitfield and Sandra and listened to Diane Hartwell's account of the afternoon. She was composed. She'd had 6 weeks and professional help finding the shape of a story that held together, and it did hold together in the way that stories hold together when they're built on things that are partially true. She had followed the procedures she'd been trained to follow. That was true. The procedures had been inadequate. That was also true. What was not true, and what Whitfield addressed methodically on cross-examination, was that the procedures had required her to spray sanitizer into a guest's face, or call him a scammer in front of an audience, or characterize his business card as a forgery. Those things were not in any procedure. Those things were choices. The tribunal found in Darnell's favor on the primary question. The termination was appropriate based on the conduct of the day in question. The finding was unambiguous on that. On the secondary questions, the tribunal found what Eleanor Marsh had predicted: partial liability. The complaint process had failed in ways that were documented and undeniable, and the company bore responsibility for that failure. 4 months of additional severance was awarded beyond what had already been offered. Darnell did not appeal. He stood outside the hearing room afterward, and Gerald Fitch, who had flown in because he wanted to be able to say he'd been present, said, "We paid more than we needed to. We paid what was accurate," Darnell said. "We could have settled for less and avoided." "Gerald," Darnell said, "Arthur Coleman's complaint was read into the evidence record today, by name. His words were read out loud in a proceeding, and they are now part of a public document. That was worth what we paid." Fitch looked at him. "You're not like other CEOs I've worked with," he said, not meanly, with the exhausted bewilderment of a man who had spent a career in rooms where people optimized for outcomes and had just watched someone optimize for something else. "I know," Darnell said. "He called Patrick that evening. Patrick picked up on the first ring. I heard," he said. "Good. The second verifying is accurate," Darnell said. "Don't spend energy on it. Use it." A pause. "How many calls have you made?" Darnell asked. 10, Patrick said. "I found the 11th person this week." She agreed to talk. "We spoke for an hour." "How many total agreed to speak with you?" 8, Patrick said. 2 declined. 1 declined. Twice of all 11 are in the report. "The ones who said no," Darnell said. "Are they in there the same way as the ones who said yes?" "More so, actually," Patrick said. "The 2 declines took up more space in the report than some of the conversations that went well. I tried to explain what it felt like to call someone and have them say they didn't want to talk to me. To call back and have them say it again." "Good," Darnell said. "There was a woman," Patrick said, and his voice changed slightly, the way voices change when they arrive at something they've been thinking about. "Third call I made. She'd stayed here 4 times before whatever happened to her happened. She had a regular room she requested, 412, corner room, good light in the mornings. She'd recommended the hotel to people." He paused. "She doesn't stay here anymore," he said. "She said after she tried to come back once. She drove to the parking structure and sat in car and couldn't make herself come in. She drove away." Darnell was quiet. "She cried on the phone," Patrick said, "and then apologized to me for crying. I apologized to me. I was the person who closed her complaint. She apologized to me for crying while she told me about it." "What did you say?" "I told her not to apologize. I told her I was sorry. I said it as many times as she needed to hear it." A pause. "I don't know if it helped," Darnell said. "You may not find out how, but it helped." They were quiet for a moment. "Patrick," Darnell said. "Yeah, you're doing the right thing." "Took me long enough," Patrick said. "Yes," Darnell said. "It did. Do it anyway." Day 62. Jess Calloway came back to Grandeur Palace, not to stay. She'd agreed when Sandra called, agreed immediately, because she'd been sitting in the lobby that afternoon, and she'd watched what happened, and she understood what the Mysteries program was trying to do, and she thought she could be useful to it. She arrived in the same clothes she'd been wearing the first time. Jeans, a jacket, sneakers. Her camera was in her bag. She didn't take it out, but she walked through the lobby doors at 2:30 in the afternoon. Different person at the front desk. Devon, late 20s, 4 months with the hotel, had gone through the new certification program twice by choice. He looked up when she walked in. Not an assessment, just a look. The kind of look that is actually a welcome before the welcome is spoken. "Good afternoon," he said. "Hi," she said. "Do you have a reservation?" "Callaway," she said. He typed, found it immediately, asked for her card. The whole process took under 2 minutes. He handed her the key card. "Room 814, he said. "Elevator's on your right. Is there anything I can help you with before you head up?" She looked at him for a moment. "No," she said. "That's everything." She wrote it down later. In the review she submitted to Sandra, she wrote, "He looked up when I walked in. Not to assess me, just to see me." There is a difference between those two things, and it is the difference between a place that wants your money and a place that wants you there. This felt like the second thing. Day 89. Patrick submitted his report. 47 pages. Darnell read it in one sitting in his office in Birmingham, a former warehouse he'd bought 12 years ago and never renovated properly because there was always something more urgent, and Ruth had teased him about it for years. He kept meaning to get around to it. He read the report straight through. The first 45 pages were what he'd asked for. Each complaint documented. Each person, their account, what Patrick had said, what they had said, what was unresolved and might always remain so. It was precise and honest, and in several places difficult to read, not because it was dramatic, but because it was specific. Specific names. Specific details. The corner room with good light in the mornings that someone hadn't been able to make herself return to. Last pupsids were different. Patrick had written about the complaint system and what he'd understood it to be for and what he'd actually used it for. He'd written, "I thought catching a complaint and containing a complaint were the same thing. They're not. Catching something means seeing it. Containing it means making sure nobody else does as. I was doing the second and telling myself it was the first." And then at the end, a paragraph that Darnell read 3 times. "There is a woman who used to request room 412 because the morning light was good. She described it to me on the phone with a specificity I keep returning to. She knew exactly which direction the windows faced and at what hour the light was best. She had been a guest here 4 times. She cared about this place. She doesn't come back anymore, and the reason she doesn't is in this building somewhere, in the way this building treated her. And I had her account of it in my hands, and I marked it, resolved. Room 412 has good light in the mornings. I will think about that for a long time." Darnell set the report down. He picked up the phone. Patrick answered on the first ring. "The last 2 pages, Darnell said. "Yeah," Patrick said. "Did you mean it? Every word?" Darnell looked at the Birmingham afternoon outside his warehouse window. "You're staying on," he said. "Not because the report was good. Because you wrote the last 2 pages when nobody asked you to. Because you understood that the thing that needed to be in the report wasn't just the facts of what happened. It was the fact of what you knew and what you did with it." Patrick was quiet. "That's the work," Darnell said. "That's what the work actually is." "I'm starting to understand that," Patrick said. Day 127. Darnell drove to Atlanta. Same rental car. Silver sedan, nothing notable. He parked in the same parking structure, sat from cutting the engine, and looked at the gray coat on the passenger seat. He didn't put it on. He sat with it for a moment, just looking at it. $47 of gray wool that had done its job. He thought about putting it on out of habit, out of the particular ritual of these visits, and then he thought, that's not what today is. Today he wasn't testing anything. He was coming to see what had been built. He put on the blue jacket he'd brought in the back seat. Plain, dark, nothing distinctive. He got out of the car. Laplace was the same in the ways that mattered and different in the ways that mattered more. The marble was still there. The chandelier, the fireplace running on a cool afternoon. Those were his. He'd paid for them. But what he was looking at now wasn't the marble. It was Devon at the front desk, moving through a check-in with a woman who had the frayed look of someone at the end of a long travel day when the way Devon's body was angled toward her, forward and attentive, and the way he handed her the key card folder so she could read it without turning it toward herself. Small things. The things that only mattered because they added up. He walked to the seating area, sat down, ordered coffee from the server who came around and said thank you when it arrived. Nobody knew who he was. He sat with that for a while. A man came through the doors around 3 in the afternoon. Late 20s, a jacket that had been good a few years ago, a rolling bag with a taped zipper pull. He approached the desk with the slightly uncertain energy of someone who wasn't sure if they were in the right place. Devon looked up. "Good afternoon, sir. Do you have a reservation with us?" "I do," the man said. "It's my first time here." He glanced up at the chandelier, at the ceiling height, at the marble. "It's nice," he said. "A small wonder in it. The kind of wonder you try to keep quiet because you're not sure you're supposed to feel it." "It is," Evans said. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Let's get shit you checked in." Darnell watched this from across the lobby. He thought about the motel in Savannah. 12 rooms and $40,000 borrowed dollars, and a January night when the pipes froze and he slept in room 4 because there was nowhere else with heat. He thought about Ruth bringing soup in a thermos that she'd driven 40 minutes to deliver because she knew, without being asked, that he needed it. He thought about the distance that night and this one. He thought, the distance isn't the point. The point is Devon. The point is the man with the taped zipper pull, who said it's nice, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to think so. And the way Devon said, "You're exactly where you're supposed to be," like it was the most ordinary, true thing in the world. His phone buzzed. "Patrick," he answered. "Zero complaints," Patrick said. "Day 127. "I know," Darnell said. "I'm in the lobby." A pause. "You didn't tell me you were coming," Patrick said. "No," he said. "Is it?" Another pause. "How does it look?" Darnell looked at Devon, who had handed the man his key card and was pointing toward the elevator with an easy gesture, saying something Darnell couldn't hear but could see was landing well from the way the man's shoulders dropped slightly, the way travel tension leaves a body when someone is simply kind to it. "It looks like what it's supposed to look like," he said, the dog. He stayed another hour. He finished his coffee and ordered one more and sat in a lobby chair and did what he'd been doing in hotel lobbies for 23 years. He watched, he counted, he filed things away. But what he was filing away this time was different from what he usually filed. Usually, he was looking for failures, for the small tells, the gap between the preferred welcome and the real one. Today, he was watching Devon say good afternoon to 12 different people and mean it differently for each of them, because each of them was different. And watching the sex dance recognize, walk a confused older guest through the restaurant reservation process with the patience of someone who understood that patience was not a cost, but the job itself. He was watching a place be what it was supposed to be. It was not perfect. It would not be perfect. Day 128 would have something in it that day 127 didn't. Some frictions, some failure of attention or care, and that would have to be caught and addressed and learned from. That was the nature of the work. The work didn't end. You didn't build something and put it down. You built it, and then you kept building day by day because the alternative was to let it become the thing it had been before, and that was not acceptable. He got up at 5:15. He walked through the lobby and nodded to Devon, who nodded back without recognition, and pushed through the tall glass doors into the Atlanta evening. The air was cool and carried the smell of autumn. And the city was doing what cities do at the edge of evening, settling and quickening at the same time, the particular energy of a day becoming a night. He went back to the parking structure. He sat in the car. He picked up the gray coat from the passenger seat. He looked at it for a moment. The gray wool, the $47. The coat that had done what it was built to do, and then some. He thought about Ruth. He thought about her in the way he'd been thinking about her lately, less like an absence and more like a voice. The voice that said you need to see what you're actually building. The voice that had been right about most things and had been right about this one too. Right in ways he was still understanding. He thought about Donna Wells typing into a terminal on the 3rd floor because she needed it to be on record somewhere, even if she didn't know if anyone would read it. He thought about Arthur Coleman writing, "I know what this is," with the careful precision of a man who'd been here before and was choosing one more time to trust that the record meant something. He thought about the woman who couldn't make herself walk through the parking structure and into the lobby and had driven away instead, and how she had told Patrick about the morning light in room 4412 and how Patrick had written it down. He folded the coat. Carefully. The way you fold something that has earned its rest. Not thrown away. Not forgotten. Set down with the particular care you give to things that have done real work. He put it on the back seat. He started the car. He pulled out of the parking structure and merged into the Atlanta evening traffic and drove south toward the highway that would take him back to Birmingham, back to the warehouse office. Ruth had always teased him about, back to the 19 properties and the board calls and the work that didn't end because the work was never supposed to end. The city fell away in the rearview mirror. He drove.